Little girl gives a secret signal to her dog, courtroom stunned as judge freezes. The courtroom was silent, so silent you could hear the scratching of pens and the gentle creak of old wooden benches. All eyes were on the frail little girl sitting behind the witness stand, her legs barely reaching the floor, her hands folded in her lap, clutching a worn-out stuffed animal that had seen better days. Her name was Lila, and she was 8 years old. She wore a pale yellow dress, the kind little girls wear on Sundays or when they want to feel brave. But today wasn't Sunday. Today, Lila was the only child in a courtroom full of adults, testifying in a custody battle that had taken a dark and bitter turn. Her mother, seated to one side with a sharp-eyed lawyer, looked both fragile and fierce, clutching a tissue. Across the room, Lila's father stared blankly, visibly shaking. But none of that mattered to Lila. She wasn't looking at either of them. She was looking at the dog sitting obediently in the aisle just outside the wooden barrier of the courtroom. His name was Charlie, a golden retriever with soft, wise eyes and a red vest that said "Service Dog, Do Not Pet." Lila had only spoken to 3 people in the last 2 years. Trauma will do that to a child. She had stopped speaking altogether the day her world cracked in half, when her father, in a moment of uncontrolled rage, had shaken her so hard she lost consciousness. The bruises healed. But something inside her voice didn't. No therapist could break through. No medication helped. Only Charlie could. The court had allowed the dog to accompany her because, as her psychologist had explained, Charlie wasn't just a support animal, he was a bridge. A bridge to the world that Lila no longer trusted. Judge Holloway, a stern woman in her 60s with a history of ruling by the book, adjusted her glasses and looked down at the girl. "Lila," she said gently. "I need to ask you a question. You don't have to answer with words if you're not ready. You can nod, or shake your head. Okay?" Lila didn't move. Her fingers tightened around the stuffed animal. Her gaze shifted, just for a second, toward Charlie. And then something happened. Without a word, Lila lifted her right hand and made a tiny movement, barely visible. A small circle in the air with her pinky finger. Charlie's ears perked. Then he stood. He trotted straight up to the witness stand, turned to face the courtroom, and sat perfectly still. Another signal. Lila tapped her chest, twice. Charlie barked once. Everyone froze. Judge Holloway leaned forward. "What does that mean?" she asked, turning to the bailiff. The psychologist stepped forward from the back of the courtroom, her eyes wide. "That's a communication sequence we developed. Lila and Charlie practiced it for months. It's her way of telling the truth when she's too afraid to speak." The judge blinked. She just said, "I'm ready. And I need to show you something." There was a long pause. Then the psychologist walked gently up to the bench and handed the judge a small envelope. "She gave me this yesterday. She said, if Charlie barks, you give this to the judge." Judge Holloway opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a hand-drawn picture. It showed a little girl, clearly Lila, crouched in the corner of a room, hands over her head. A large, angry man towered over her, his face contorted in rage. In the corner of the picture was Charlie, barking at the man. Tears welled in the judge's eyes as she flipped the picture over. There, written in careful block letters, was one line. "He says he loves me, but I'm only safe when he's not near." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. The father stood up suddenly. "This is ridiculous. That dog is trained. She could've." "Sit down," the judge snapped, voice sharp with fury. "Or I will have you removed from this courtroom." Silence fell again. Lila didn't flinch. Charlie sat still, calm as ever, his eyes focused on the girl he'd sworn to protect. And then, Lila spoke. Her voice was soft. Raspy. But clear. "Charlie knows who keeps me safe," she said. "He remembers everything. even when I couldn't. The courtroom was stunned. Even the court reporter's fingers stopped typing. Judge Holloway looked at her for a long moment. Then she turned to the mother. "Ma'am, I'm granting you full custody. Effective immediately." The mother burst into tears. The father tried to protest, but the bailiff stepped in, firm and silent. But it wasn't over yet. As the judge gathered her papers and the gavel moved toward its final bang, she paused. She looked at Lila. Then at Charlie. "You've said more in one signal than most adults do in 1,000 words," she whispered. And with a trembling hand, she set down the gavel. Not in judgment, but in awe. 6 months later. The sun was shining on the park bench where Lila sat, a drawing pad in her lap, Charlie curled beside her. A little boy approached and asked, "Can I pet your dog?" Lila looked up. She smiled. "Only if you ask him first." The boy tilted his head. "How?" She tapped her chest, twice. Charlie gave a happy bark and wagged his tail. And for the first time in a long time, Lila laughed. A real laugh. The kind that said the bridge was working. The kind that said healing had begun. Uplifting message. Sometimes the smallest voices speak the loudest truths. And sometimes, the strongest guardians don't wear uniforms or carry badges, they walk on 4 legs, waiting for the signal to remind us that courage, love, and healing can come in the gentlest of forms. Would you like a narrated version of this story or a visual for sharing?